Ladies and gentlemen, Marshall Brown.
Hello, I'm Marshall Brown. Welcome back to Water Matters. On this week's show, we are delighted to welcome Carl LoBue, the senior marine scientist with the Nature Conservancy in New York. Carl is one of the island's top experts on the sources of nitrogen pollution and the innovative ways people are working to reduce it. And for a change, Carl has some really positive news to share with us. That's all coming up on this edition of Water Matters, so stay tuned. We'll be right back.
From the Grassroots Studio in beautiful downtown Port Washington, this is Water Matters with host Marshall Brown and special guest Carl LoBue. Brought to you by the Jump In campaign and made possible in part by funding from the Long Island Community Foundation. And now, here again is your host, Marshall Brown.
Hello and welcome back to Water Matters and happy Earth Day. Today on Earth Day, we have a very special guest. This is Carl LoBue, senior marine scientist at the Nature Conservancy. Carl and I met literally the day that we formed Save the Great South Bay. We needed marine scientists to help figure out how to fix the bay, and he's going to present here on what's wrong with the bay and maybe even how we can fix it. Looking forward to it, Carl.
Great, thanks, Marshall. So we've had some really great speakers here in the past few weeks. We've learned about some of the nuances of nitrogen pollution and the real science behind how things are working in different bays. We've learned about how the management structure of water on Long Island isn't really set to the challenges that we face today. We've learned from some of the successes that we've had, the Pine Barrens Act that really helped make it so that things aren't worse than they are, and some of the other things like the Community Preservation Fund on the East End. And we've learned that suburban sprawl doesn't pay. It doesn't reduce our taxes. If suburban sprawl paid for itself in lowering taxes, Long Island would have the lowest taxes in the country. And so what I hope to get across today is that this is, in fact, a solvable problem, and working together we can solve this problem. When I was a kid growing up on the South Shore of Long Island, if you weren't a clammer, either your neighbor or your family member or you had friends who were. Clamming was a big part of the industry. And when I came to the Nature Conservancy about 15 years ago, science had just started to roll out about how the impact of losing all those clams and the occurrence of harmful algal blooms. And a bunch of experiments were done to show that if those clams had still been there, if the overfishing hadn't occurred, might we be less susceptible to issues like brown tide? And the work showed that that exactly was the case, that our bays were more prone to harmful algal blooms like brown tide because of the lower numbers of shellfish. And so I became heavily involved working for the Nature Conservancy, where we owned 14,000 acres of bay bottom in Central Gate South Bay, trying to restore hard clams. And we've invested a lot of resources in that, and it's been about kind of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And we continue to have some algae bloom setbacks, and it's really hard to get these shellfish populations established when you have chronic algae blooms. We've been involved in seagrass restoration, trying to bring our eelgrass meadows back to places where they used to be and they are no longer. And the honest truth is the results have been uninspiring. The only real success has been in some of the most pristine areas left on the East End. We've done a lot of work studying salt marsh integrity, understanding if our salt marshes can keep up with sea level rise. They're very important in protecting our coastal communities. And what we've learned is that the impacts of nutrient pollution are weakening our marshes, You can see from this slide there's actually some CAT scans on this side of the root masses in areas that have high nitrogen pollution and low nitrogen pollution, and it turns out that the grasses themselves make less roots when they don't need to, when there's so much basically fertilizer in the water, and so they tend to fall apart, like you can see in this photo here. And then if you've been paying attention, you know that we've had some pretty serious fish kills. This is a result of low oxygen in the water when all these plants decay or are respiring at night. We have no oxygen. And so after sunsets, this is what happens to the fish. This is from last year in Peconic River. And it turns out all of these different symptoms have the same cause. It's overloading of our surface waters with too much nutrients, and in this case nitrogen is the primary nutrient, and it's reactive nitrogen in the forms of nitrates and ammonia, a lot of that stemming from urea or fertilizers. And as a scientist, some of these symptoms were occurring in places where we didn't have a clear source of nutrient pollution. We knew these symptoms were directly related to it, and in places where we had big pipes, sewer pipes, like the western Long Island Sound, Jamaica Bay, the western bays of Nassau County, it was pretty clear what the problem was. But it really wasn't until we started to get together with the folks who are studying our drinking water supply, which is underground, that we really found the smoking gun. This chart here is from a drinking water well from Bicycle Path in Brookhaven. A lot of the wells from the Suffolk County Comprehensive Management Report on water show very, very similar trends, and you can see the trend in this is that before development was really intense, there was very low nitrates in the groundwater, and it just keeps increasing. And trying to understand where that increase is coming from in our groundwater, we did a lot of analyses to see how land use is impacting the quality of our groundwater underneath. And it turns out on the bottom of this sheet you can see that in Suffolk County, cesspools and septic systems are a major source of the nitrogen pollution in our bays and harbors. In Huntington and Northport, it's about 71%, 69% in Great South Bay, 61% in Moriches and Shinnecock, and about 43% in Peconic Bay, where there's still a big agricultural input from the east end, from the North Fork. The good news is that that people are paying attention to this. It's gotten a good level of attention, and particularly the connection between the resilience of our communities, our coastal communities on Long Island, the falling apart of the salt marshes, as well as thinking about the long-term desirability, what drives the economy, what makes people want to live on Long Island. And that is largely the idea that we are coastal communities, the boating and the fishing, our access to beaches. It's really hard to envision people really wanting to spend a lot of money to live and work in coastal communities where you might not be able to swim in the water, eat the seafood, and in some cases where you can't even flush your toilet at high tide. This chart is a little bit complicated, but I want to show it because in addition to the kind of sewering projects that are slated, that I think are good for the communities where they're slated for, there's some really exciting new information on septic systems that can reduce the amount of nitrogen in the groundwater. And this is a little bit of a complicated chart. They have this similar problem in many states around the country, and in the state of Florida, consultants were challenged to put together a very, very simple septic system that had only one moving part that could reduce nitrogen. And what this chart shows, it's actually a map of someone's backyard. The first map is the nitrogen plume. The red part is about 40 milligrams per liter of nitrogen underneath where the septic system was, where it drained. And then 2 years later, after installing a relatively simple drain field, almost no nitrogen in the groundwater, close to zero, right underneath the plume. And the exciting thing is that Suffolk County is in the midst of now starting to approve these for use. And what we're hoping is that we can see a transition away from the old standard cesspools and septic systems that we have on Long Island. This is an image of a new house being developed and the kind of equipment that needs to go in for a traditional Long Island cesspool. These big cement rings are put in the ground, and they basically force inject untreated sewage into our drinking water aquifers, and that eventually flows into our bays. One of my colleagues jokes that the little porta potty next to the septic rings might actually be a better solution than the septic rings themselves. But what's exciting is just last week, one of the first modern drain fields was installed here in Suffolk County in Mastic Beach, and you can see that everything on this drain field. The reason I'm showing you the back of a pickup truck, everything in a modern drain field fits in the back of a pickup truck, and so in terms of cost of bringing all this kind of heavy equipment to a site versus bringing a pickup truck full of things to a site. We're talking about a very comparable cost in terms of these new systems that are much more efficient. This is just some images of some in fact, Suffolk County inspectors scratching their head and just thinking, I suppose, is this going to be the future, these shallow water drain fields? What's really exciting about these drain fields is they not only will reduce the nitrogen input, but there's other contaminants of concern in our wastewater. Things like pharmaceutical drugs, the things that are in shampoos, even flame retardants that are in children's clothing that we wash. They all pose a threat to the quality of our drinking water. And so what's being proposed is basically a solution that would address both nitrogen and the quality of our drinking water. Some really smart things. And it turns out that these new systems can be much more adaptable. This is actually an image of an old structure in Rhode Island where one of these was installed. In this situation, they were able to simply, this is a historic building. The owners did not want to have their flowers and fences and the historic structures disturbed. The installers were able to simply lift up the bluestone tiles, roll up the sod, install the drain field, and have everything looking pretty much like it was in pretty short order. So this is some pretty exciting things, and I think this is the future for Long Island. There's really good news in that in my career, I have never seen federal agencies, the EPA, state agencies like the DEC, Suffolk County Department of Health, Stony Brook University Center for Clean Water Technology, all working so closely together with unified goals in mind. It really is an unprecedented level of cooperation. It's going to take the citizens and residents and voters of Long Island to keep the pressure on, to keep the momentum going. But I got to say, in good faith, I think everybody is really working hard towards doing the right thing. So as a resident, perhaps, what is it that you can do in terms of septic systems? Not everyone's going to update their septic system right away. Not everyone's going to have an opportunity to hook up to sewers, but there are going to be things that you can do. First of all, some folks might not even know if they have a cesspool or a standard septic system or where it is. It might be beneficial to start looking into it so that you know what it is that your home has, and that if there's maintenance involved in that maintenance is taken care of. But we believe that in November, there's going to be several opportunities, perhaps more than one ballot initiative on the ballot for voters to vote yes for clean water. And I don't know at this point what the details of those will be, but strongly encourage people to pay attention to that. And then talk to your neighbors, talk to your family, talk to your friends so that people are aware of the issues and that they have an opportunity to do something. In a couple of weeks, today is Earth Day. In a couple of weeks, around Memorial Day, we're hoping to have a lot of information on our website, some small videos explaining how nitrogen pollution works, some of the impacts, and some testimonials from Long Islanders all the way from the Western Bays to Montauk Point. And hopefully that will be useful to you as well. And again, hopefully you can share that and get some use out of it. Thank you very much, and that's about it.
The Great South Bay. For hundreds of years, it was a shellfish factory, acres of clams and oysters. This shallow lagoon on the south shore of Long Island provided half of all the hard-shell clams eaten in this country. For generations, baymen worked the bay and raised their families on it. We swam here, we sailed, we fished. But after World War II, Long Island quadrupled in size, and our local waters suffered greatly. Hundreds and thousands of septic tanks, fertilizers, pesticides, road runoff, killing our Great South Bay. In 1985, the first major brown tide hit. The clam population fell by 99%, and the way of life seemingly disappeared. Today, the people of Long Island are starting to take a stand. They are fighting for a future we want for our children. Save the Great South Bay, a nonprofit on the rise, is working to educate Long Islanders as to what's wrong with our waters and how we can fix them. We advocate for local sewer construction along the bay, for open space preservation, stricter guidelines on fertilizer use, for implementing the latest in wastewater technology. We fight for local action, and most importantly, for a return of the clams and the oysters. Oysters alone can filter the bay clean and bring back hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue and restore our local economy. We ask you to help us bring back a cleaner bay. Use only eco-friendly fertilizers. Skip the pesticides. Call upon your local officials to address the environmental crisis all of Long Island is facing today, because Long Island and its future is worth saving. For more information, go to our website, www.savethegreatsouthbay.org, or find us on Facebook. The solution starts with you.
Save the Great South Bay!
The views expressed on the Soapbox are not necessarily those of Water Matters, its sponsors, hosts, guests, or underwriters. If you'd like to stand on the Water Matters Soapbox and sound off about a water issue, send your script to soapbox@liwater.org.
Hello and welcome back to Water Matters. We're here with Carl LoBue, Senior Marine Scientist for the Nature Conservancy. Carl, that was an amazing presentation. I really enjoyed it. I'm really curious about these drain fields. This is really a new one on me. It must have been something they came up with recently.
Yeah, so as a marine, I'm a marine biologist by training, oceanographer, and I've just the last few years delved into this decentralized wastewater technology world, and it's pretty exciting. It seems new here in this part of the country, but it's not new in other parts of the countries. There's entire industries built around this, working in states all around the country and all around the world. And there's a whole variety of out-of-the-box nitrogen-reducing septic systems, because this problem's not unique to Long Island. But what's really exciting is this non-proprietary drain field technology. It's almost not correct to call it technology. You basically have a small bilge pump that pressure doses a drain field slowly over time so that it doesn't all flood in when you take a shower or do the laundry. And there's media, which is basically a combination of sand and wood chips and things like that, and simply utilizing the naturally occurring bacteria in our soils, in our surface soils, and in the media that is put under the drain fields. It's over 90% effective at removing nitrogen, as well as, really interestingly, removing a whole bunch of other contaminants of concern. And so it's exciting. We think that in the next year or so, these will be approved in Suffolk County. They're already been tested in Florida. They're being tested in Cape Cod, which has the same soils. Now, Stony Brook University is going to be working with them, but I think it's going to happen pretty soon. And the fact that it's non-proprietary creates opportunities and challenges. So the opportunities are you don't have to go to a single manufacturer for these. The challenges are that the regulators are going to have to actually design the specifications so that the installers know exactly what is required.
Well, it's nice to have that in our toolkit. There's 500,000 cesspools and septic tanks between Nassau and Suffolk County. We're looking at sewering. We're looking at on-site denitrification systems, and now this. So I guess you'd say it's going to be a mixed solution.
Yeah, it's absolutely different communities are going to call for different things. In some communities, sewering absolutely makes sense. Honestly, in some communities, they know they should have been sewered 30, 40 years ago, and they just weren't. And in other communities, sewering will never make sense. And so having many different options for these decentralized technology, it's really great. And the main driver has been we need to make the cost comparable to the cost of the old style septic systems. And I think what's exciting about these drain fields is that those costs are on par.
And how much money are we talking here?
Whenever you install a septic system, a lot of the cost is driven by the particular site that you have, and so the real goal is to get the cost of the new systems on par with the cost of what it would cost to install the traditional system on the site that you have. So.
Well, there's going to have to be a lot put into the planning of this. To inventory all those septic tanks and cesspools. One of the action items you offered to the audience was just that. Find out what you have and where it is. And without that basic knowledge, I don't know how we really start to roll things out.
Yeah, I can tell you the facility that I work at and live at actually it still has old brick-lined cesspools. And we're in the midst now of installing a constructed wetland as well as one of these new drain fields for some of the different buildings. And so it's sort of a demonstration where people will be able to come and look at it and see how it works. So.
Out at Cold Spring Harbor.
Yes.
Yeah. Lovely facility.
Yeah.
So we both grew up on the bay, both clammed, both saw its disappearance, and both have worked to try and bring it all back. As you know, there's an initiative to route the sewer line from the proposed Ronkonkoma hub. It needs to go somewhere south through Savo, West Savo, and Oakdale, with the goal of taking out these low-lying cesspools and septic tanks. Well, maybe drain fields would help there too, but point is, the hope or the surmise is that if we remove these cesspools that are basically at the water table, the water in the area will become healthy enough that we could start to see a return of oystering and clams, of course, as well, in sufficient numbers that there would be local filtering of the water, and the bay in that area would be cleaner.
Yeah. So there's I was a science advisor for the Oakdale and West Sayville community reconstruction team after Sandy, and it turns out the water table is really high in those communities, just couple of feet right below the surface, and so a lot of those septic
during a
systems,
storm and high tide, that's a whole other matter, right?
Yeah, it's a real problem. Even on moon tides or rain events that elevate the water table, you have failing septic systems, and it turns out that in many cases, nitrogen pollution is also coming from the same source as pathogen pollution. Pathogen pollution, it can be viruses and bacteria that come from human waste from failing septic systems. And so the area off of Oakdale, Great River, Browns River, and West Sayville has repeatedly shown up worse and worse and worse. And since I've been working in Great South Bay for about 15 years, we've lost about 2,500 acres of shellfishing area because the contamination line keeps going further and further south into the bay. And so the community reconstruction zone identified sewers as something that was really important for their vision of revitalizing their waterfront, of getting people out swimming again and getting people out shellfishing again. And I think it really does make a lot of sense, obviously, to transition out of those old failing septic systems, and to get either sewering or some of this new technology. And there'll be a cost-benefit analysis for each one, but I think that sewering, if that line comes down there, sewering those communities is a really important part.
Well, especially if done right, you can get $100,000 revenue per acre in oyster farming.
Yeah.
And it would certainly help the oyster farmers to the west, out in the town of Babylon, I would think, because they're getting that nitrogen because of the mixture of the water.
Yes, harmful algal blooms are a real problem for oyster farmers, particularly the toxic ones. We have so many different kinds now; it's almost hard to keep track. Some just slow the growth of the shellfish. Some actually kill the shellfish. Some they can do just fine, but they become poisonous to eat. And then certainly, if you have the bacterial pollution from failing septic systems, then you can't eat the shellfish as well. So cleaning up the waters has multiple benefits to the shellfish farmers.
Well, let's wrap this up because this is all about what we can do and what has worked too. So if you could go over some of your success stories.
Sure.
Points towards the future. It's Earth Day.
Look, I think success stories are really important to point out because this is absolutely a solvable problem. Even though this nitrogen pollution, they call it eutrophication, is a global problem, it doesn't require a global solution like climate change does, because water pollution is local. And so our water bodies are local and the sources of the pollution are local. And in places where we've addressed it, we've fixed entire bays in Hawaii where the corals have come back from modern sewering and moving the sewer pipe, Boston Harbor. But you don't have to go that far. You can go, Tampa Bay has more eelgrass now than it did in the 1950s.
That's great.
And 1 million people have moved into that watershed during that time frame. And it's all because of modern sewering. The Long Island Sound is a little bit closer to home, and we've seen an amazing recovery from the reductions in nitrogen, 58% reduction from the point sources of nitrogen in Long Island Sound. The dead zone has shrank. I believe it's shrank by about 22%, that dead zone in the Western Sound. Further east in the Sound, in Niantic Bay, where a sewer pipe was extended and moved to a smarter location, all the eelgrass recovered since that. And so there's success stories right here at home, and I can tell you personally, I'm a fisherman. In the last few years, I've been fishing in places that I never would have fished just a few years ago because they were part of that Western Sound dead zone, and we were catching sea bass in places that used to have no life at all. So it's very exciting to see that recovery happening. And so we know it works, and we know that it's just a little more challenging transitioning all these septic systems, but we know we can do it.
Let's talk very briefly, because we have Tom Schultz coming on pretty soon, about one of nature's success stories.
Yeah, so this is for folks who don't know. About 3 years ago in Hurricane Sandy, we had a new inlet formed in eastern Great South Bay, an area called Bellport Bay. And since that time, there's been an incredible recovery in the water quality as well as the wildlife, and we expect to see that to continue because some things take many years, like the eelgrass, to come back. All those new islands that are forming will eventually become salt marsh islands. We've seen it historically, and it's really exciting to see it in action. And it's really a great example of how fast things can turn around if they're just given a chance. And I liken the new inlet to if you had a smelly room because you had maybe a garbage can that was real smelly, and you open the window, the room might be less smelly, but you still have to address that source of the problem. And so that we've opened the window in that area, and we've seen what can happen. And now I think over time we just need to address the sources of the problems that are continuing to flow.
It was your colleague Chris Clapp who phoned my cell even as the winds were dying down from Sandy. We still didn't have power for another 2 weeks after that, to say you would not believe what happened.
Yeah.
He said it would have cost millions of dollars to have made that breach, and it happened precisely where it needed to happen.
Yeah, the fishermen historically knew it. In fact, if you go back in time when there were problems, even in the 1800s, there's a great story about them bringing oxen over in barges trying to dig a new inlet, recognizing the value of water quality. So people have known this would be the case for a long time. We saw it in the 90s when Little Pike's Inlet opened, but that blew through a neighborhood with a road, and so that there was reasons to close that. This one's in a wilderness area, and we know it's not having impacts to flooding, and so it's really exciting, and hopefully the resource managers in our agencies will keep the same kind of level-headedness that they have so far in thinking about how to manage this moving forward.
And I'll take that another step further. If Gil Go has been trying to become an inlet again since they closed it, since Robert Moses closed it, and I guess they'd have to put a bridge over it, but that would certainly help to flush and drain the bay in the west.
Yeah, there's more challenges there because of the highway, and that's why having the one in the wilderness area is actually such it's a great lesson to us, and maybe we can be more informed as we make decisions about some of these other places that have more challenges.
Indeed. Well, this was really wonderful. I couldn't have thought of a better guest for Earth Day, and I want to thank you, Carl.
Thank you, Marshall.
You've been a mentor and an inspiration all along the way. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, that'll do it for Water Matters. Happy Earth Day again. On May 6th, we'll have Tom Schultz of Friends of Bellport Bay. He will discuss the breach and what they're doing out there to bring back oysters and protect that important natural resource. Thank you.